In this lesson, we are going to talk about glands and their structure and function. Now, if you have watched the epithelial tissue lessons, you'll remember that glands are derived from epithelium, and the development of glands actually begins in the fetal and even the embryonic stages. So the main functions of glands are to anabolize the secretory products and to secrete whatever that substance is. So anabolism just means to build or create. So basically it's taking substances from the extracellular fluid, creating whatever the secretion is, and then secreting it. So just know that glands have to be stimulated in order to actually secrete the substance. So this could be something like a temperature regulation mechanism, like with sweating, or maybe some other chemical reaction, like when the pancreas secretes insulin. Now, we classify glands in a couple of ways. The first is by the number of cells. They're either unicellular, which means one, or multicellular, which means many. Now, there's only one unicellular gland, and that is the goblet cell. If you see a goblet cell through a microscope, it literally looks like it's shaped like a goblet, and basically there's just mucus in there for you, ready to secrete. Everything else is a multicellular gland. Now, we classify also by general function. So glands are either exocrine or endocrine. So exo means outside. So exocrine secretion is secretion through a duct out to a free surface. And usually this is an actual free surface. So think something like sweat glands, salivary glands, or even mucus glands like in the digestive tract. Now, endo means inside. So endocrine glands actually secrete their substance directly into the bloodstream. So it stays inside. So the best example of endocrine glands would be things like the thyroid gland or the adrenal glands. Now, fun fact here, the pancreas actually has both endocrine and exocrine secretions. Now, we'll also classify glands by manner of secretion, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, specifically when we're talking about exocrine glands, we also have a way to describe them based on their shape and structure. The first is by the number of ducts involved. So one duct is called simple, many ducts is called compound. Now, I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Then we look at the actual secretory portion of the gland. If it is tube-like, it's called tubular. Pretty easy, right? And if it's sac-like, it's called alveolar. Now, another term you might hear for this is acinar, but we're going to use alveolar. So let's look at the different combinations of these and what the structure looks like, as well as an example of where it's found. So the first is simple tubular. This is pretty easy. So first, remember that exocrine glands secrete to an actual free surface. So here's the surface, and here's the duct. So with simple tubular, the secretory portion is tube-like, just like this. Okay, that's it, simple tubular. These are found in the small intestine. Now, simple alveolar is the same in that it just has one duct, but this time the secretory portion is sac-like, like this. That's it. So these are our sebaceous glands or our oil glands in the skin. Now, we can also see some branching. Now, this is where we differentiate a little bit between branches and multiple ducts. Branch just means that one duct has many secretory portions on it, but still only one duct. So simple branch tubular looks like this: one duct with multiple tubular secretory portions, but it still only has one duct here. Okay, so simple branched alveolar is the same, except that the secretory portions are sac-like. So you might have one here, and one here. Okay, so branches, but still only one duct. Simple branched tubular is found in the stomach and the uterus, and simple branched alveolar are also some of our sebaceous glands. So now let's look at what compound looks like. Again, compound means multiple ducts. So if this is the surface, you're going to have a single external duct, and then you're going to have multiple internal ducts that lead to your secretory portions. In this case, tube-like. And you could have multiple, you could have branches at this point, or you could just have a single. So what we see here is you have your external duct, and then you also have multiple internal ducts. That is compound, okay? Compound tubular is found in the liver. Now, compound alveolar, same thing. You have one external, and then you have many internal ducts that lead to alveolar type secretory portions. And again, they could be branched. You could have multiple on one duct, but either way, what you're seeing is you have many internal ducts. So compound alveolar is found in the pancreas, the mammary glands, and the salivary glands. Now, sometimes this gets confusing to people. Remember, exocrine glands secrete to an actual free surface, but free surface doesn't mean it's outside the body. It just means it's a free surface. So in the pancreas, it actually secretes enzymes into the small intestine, and the inside of the small intestine actually is a free surface because there's no other tissue touching it. Okay, makes sense? So the last two types we'll talk about are a bit specialized. So the first is simple coiled tubular. So let's break this down. It is simple, so it has one duct, and we know that the secretory portion is tube-like. The difference here is the coiled part. So you're actually going to see a coil like this. So the simple coiled tubular is found in our sweat glands. The last one is compound, so multiple ducts, right? So we have one external, multiple internals, and then it's tubulo-alveolar. All that means is it has both tubular and alveolar type secretory portion. So it's a nice combination. This is the majority of our salivary glands. So that was a basic rundown of the different shapes of exocrine glands. So let's just quickly talk about the other way we classify glands, which is by the manner of secretion. Holocrine, apocrine, and merocrine. You may also hear apocrine. So if this is the secretory portion of our duct, let's say we've got a tubular. Remember that most of the time you find cuboidal epithelium in our ducts, remember? So here's our cube-like structures, our cube-like cells in a layer in the secretory portion of our duct. If you have a holocrine type secretion, this cell is making your secretion, your secretory product, and in order to secrete it, the entire cell just disintegrates. So when that entire cell disintegrates, this substance is able to go out into the duct and actually be excreted. So that's holocrine. I like to think of it, if you remember the word hollow, because it leaves this hollow space here that then gets filled in by another cell as the cells reproduce. Now, apocrine is a little different. What we see in apocrine, if this is our cell, is we see it start to pinch up a little part of the cell at the top here. The little part of the cell membrane pinches, and then it bursts open, and the secretory product comes straight out, and then the cell actually just repairs itself. So it's only part of the cell that disintegrates. The cell itself just repairs itself. So you may see this little pinch up point, and the secretion is able to come out and be secreted. So I remember this with the word apex. Remember, apex means like the top of something, or it might mean something comes to a point. So you can remember that kind of pinches up and breaks off just this little part of the cell and allows it to disintegrate. Now, merocrine is the other most common type of manner of secretion, and it secretes by exocytosis. What that means is that you have little secretory vesicles inside of the cell. So if this is my cell, I'll have a little vesicle in here that gets all of my secretory product, whatever it is. And that little vesicle will move up to the cell membrane, and it'll kind of join with it and then release the product that way. But the cell membrane itself is not damaged or destroyed at all. There's no disintegration at all. It just joins with it, secretes that secretory product, and the cell stays intact. And then there might be, another vesicle down here that's still still busy building its secretory product and just hasn't released yet. So merocrine is actually all of our endocrine cells and most of our exocrine cells. So where we see these, apocrine we see in mammary and sweat glands. And then holocrine we see in our sebaceous glands. So again, our oil glands and our goblet cells. So just these couple of specialized places have these other types of secretion, but basically everything else secretes by merocrine. So remember that glands will create and secrete the substance that they're specialized to, depending on the function of the gland. It's either endocrine, which means straight into the bloodstream, or exocrine, which gets secreted through a duct out to a free surface. We classify exocrine glands by their shape, so they're either simple or compound and either tubular or alveolar. And finally, we know that there's 3 main ways that the secretion actually happens. Holocrine, think hollow, because the whole cell just gets destroyed. Apocrine, you want to think apex, because it comes up to that point and just releases part of it, destroys part of the cell to release. And then merocrine, which secretes by exocytosis, which literally means exiting the cell. So those little vesicles come up and exit the cell that way. And this makes up the majority of our glands. All right, so that's it for our lesson on glands. Make sure you check out the resources and the images attached to this lesson for a great summary of what we just talked about. Now go out and be your best selves today, guys. And as always, happy nursing.